I was watching Dr. O'Neill liking your app and smiling through it because he's the person who's going to talk to us about the National Cardiogenic Shock Initiative, the one he started, the one he's spearheaded, the incredible Bill O'Neill, who is, to me, one of the legends of interventional cardiology, a national, international, recognized leader in our field. Not just in early coronary disease, STEMI, shock, cardiogenic shock, all of above, but also for structural heart disease, where he was one of the pioneers, performing some of the most difficult and most first in man, in fact, studies and the first in the United States for structural heart disease. He's worldly recognized. I need not to say anything, but what I'm really thankful, and I spoke to him about this today, is that if it weren't for him, Cindy Grimes, who's one of the leaders, female leaders, when I first came, it was just 2 or 3 women in interventional cardiology. And Cindy will attest to the fact that if it weren't for Bill O'Neill recognizing that she was talented, that she was driven, that she wanted to be no different than the rest of the guys in the pack, that was all of them, that she would never have been risen to the level that she was because he really, really put her there. And of course, she did a lot of the work, but it takes that kind of a incredible man to raise up a woman in a field that is dominated by men, and now we see more and more. And if it weren't for Cindy, I wouldn't be here. So it just is, this is the domino effect of what an incredible leader can do, and no other than Bill O'Neill. It is really a privilege to have you here, Bill. And let's have no one else talk about the National Cardiogenic Shock Initiative but you, Dr. O'Neill.
You know, Roxanne, the reason that we're running behind is because you have all these incredible auditory introductions that take forever. So next year, what I suggest is just call up Joe Blow. He needs no introduction. Come up and give your talk. So, anyway, so I was furiously taking notes this morning from Dr. Sharma. I have to tell you that between 1996 and 1999, I had the honor of being involved with the national board to create the first certification exam for interventional cardiology. I was really lucky because as an author, I was grandfathered in and didn't actually have to take the test. And so then that was great. So then now 2011, it's my 10-year recertification. Okay, so I thought, God, am I going to do this? I don't really know if I want to. I'm like 60. And anyway, so I did it. And fortunately, I knew a third of the questions because I actually answered 3 of the questions that I wrote. So that wasn't too hard. So then, okay, that's fine in 2011. Now, 2020 comes up and I go, oh God, do I do it again? And so this is like my 3rd certification exam. And I'm thinking, oh man, I really, there's a lot of stuff I'd forgotten about. And so what I did is I went back and looked at the top 10 that Dr. Sharma has put together. And honestly, that's kind of like one of the best study things you could possibly do, because he goes over all of the great trials and all the important trials and really teaches you what you have to study. So I furiously wrote it down. Actually, last year, before the test, I panicked and I called Samin, and he gave me the slides so I could kind of review those, and it was a really great review. Anyway, I think that it's great to have those slides, and it's a super way to present. I'm going to talk with you for a few minutes about the National Cardiogenic Shock Initiative, and these are my disclaimers. First, why is it taking so long to do randomized trials? Okay, I think that's really the key thing that you ask about this, because the number one critique we get about all of these things that we've done is that it's not randomized. And I think that the reason is because the field is really basically taking a long time to develop. We tried to do a randomized trial in 2007, Impella versus balloon pump. There were 10 centers involved. The company, Abumed, spent $3 million and they got 10 patients recruited. And it stopped. And so it's like, man, oh man. But I'm glad, because if you take a look at what we did, so Impella was approved in 2007 for hemodynamic support. So if you thought your patient needed hemodynamic support, you could put it in. And that really basically stymied the field because people were using it. They were using it willy-nilly. This is a data that we presented looking at between 2007 and 2016. There were 16,000 patients that were treated with acute cardiogenic shock. In centers that did more than 4 procedures, we polled and see what their survival rate, and the median survival was 50%. So we weren't doing any better with Impella than we were doing with balloon pump. If we'd completed that study in 2007, it would have been a negative trial, and the field would have gone on to move to something else. But we found something interesting. There's a bell-shaped curve. There's a lot of sites that were getting really very good outcomes, and then many sites were like, I mean, if you have 0% survival in patients using this device, you have to take a hard look in the mirror. And so what I'd say to any center is, well, if you wonder how you're doing, if you're using Impella and getting 80% survival, great. Keep on, you're doing perfect. But so then we looked, and there were a third of the centers that had a very low survival, and a third had a high survival. And we wanted to see what are the best practices that are associated with an improvement in survival. And these were the predictors. First of all, foremost, and we've heard this before, but I can't reemphasize how important this is to use the PA catheter. And the PA catheter will significantly improve survival. It doesn't do anything magical, but it helps you understand how to drive the hemodynamics and how to manage the hemodynamics. And Amir really brilliantly told you about how, in his case, they were able to be useful. We used the PVAD before the Impella, and then the larger CP was more important than the 2.5. We looked at the CVAD registry, which is an ongoing registry after the FDA approved the devices. There was a post-approval registry, and looked at the management of cardiogenic shock, and we found that when the device was implanted prior to the angioplasty, there was a better survival. You can understand that because there is some unloading that occurs before the arteries open, and also it is very dangerous to do a heart cath in patients that are in cardiogenic shock. And in the previous experience, in the old days, there were many patients that actually had hemodynamic collapse just with a coronary angiogram. And then the final thing is that survival was significantly improved by having a rapid turnaround. So use the Impella first, get the patient on support. And so now we're really using this concept of door to support, not door to unload. These are the calculations that we have to use, and we have to start talking the same language. Today, if you do an elective case for an intermediate severity lesion, it's almost malpractice not to do an FFR. 10 years ago, hardly anybody knew what an FFR is. Now we talk about FFR constantly, and these are the two formulas. The cardiac power output is a measure of left-sided support, and this gives you watts of power, and the pulmonary pulsatility index is the number that tells you the right heart. And so remember, 40% of shock patients have RV dysfunction. And so you can't just look at the left side. And so the CPO is important. A number, it comes as watts, and I'll go further into this. Dr. Finke and the group from the shock study looked at CPO and looked at the power, and you can see that the break point is, as Dr. Kinney suggested, a break point of 0.6. So once the CPO starts dropping below 0.6, the mortality skyrockets. If the CPO is 1, then they've got a very good survival. So this is the ranges, and this is a target, and we consider having a CPO greater than 0.6 a target for managing the hemodynamics. This is the algorithm that we followed in the shock reg. Rapid assessment, rapid identification of the patient, then the PCI is done. After the PCI, then a right heart cath data is looked at. You put the right heart cath in before or after if you want. If the CPO is greater than 0.6 and the PAPI is greater than 0.9, that means the left-sided support is doing okay, and the right side is doing okay. And these patients can be sent to the CCU, and then you can wean and decrease the inotropes and vasopressors. If, on the other hand, if the CPO is less than 0.6, the patient is still in shock. That's really unacceptable. And if you let them go, and I'll show you this data, they're going to have a very poor survival. And so take a look. If this is problem solved, if the right side is involved, then you have to consider RV support. If it's still the left left side, you're not getting adequate power, then you have to increase LV support. And this is kind of where we have to figure out, and if you're doing these patients in your lab, you have to figure out what is going to be your escalation strategy. And I think that's very important to decide ahead of time when you're having problems. So we did this in Southeast Michigan. We got all of our sites together, we parked our egos, and we put together a registry looking at these systematic best practices. Now, I have to tell you, and I'm going to kind of shame the New York and the Manhattan institutions here because there's enormous ego in Manhattan. I came here 6 years ago and I said, look, we did this in Detroit, why don't you do this in Manhattan? Oh, yeah, let's do it. Well, that hasn't been crap. So nobody here in Manhattan has done it. Why haven't people organized a shock program? Do whatever it is you want to do, but at least organize, look at your outcomes and see if you can get an improvement in practice. So this is what we did. We put the National Cardiogenic Shock Initiative. There are 80 participating hospitals. 406 patients were included. We used this formula for rapid assessment of the patient, use of the right heart catheterization. And the data that we had was really superb. In stage class shock C, a 76% survival, in D a 76%, and even E, patients in extremis, almost a 60% survival. So you can see that we can get excellent outcomes for these patients, even in the very high-risk patients. We published this data, and then these are the 30-day survival. For patients that are in class C and D, almost a 70% survival. When you combine everybody, a 72% survival. And this is in comparison to medical therapy in the shock trial. In the culprit shock, balloon pump shock trials, a lower survival. So we believe that we're going to be able to improve outcomes with a systematic approach, which is organized and uses hemodynamic monitor to drive decision-making and try to decrease vasopressor use. And this is the data that you can see. When we look at the lactates, when the lactates are low and the cardiac power output is greater than 0.6, the patients have an almost 90% survival. Whereas when the lactate is elevated and the CPO is less, a 30% survival. So we watch this over time. For the first 24 hours, we're carefully assessing this, and it is a dynamic process. The patients may be doing okay in the cath lab and get worse over time, but you can't let them stay in profound shock because they're going to have a terrible survival. So I just want to show you that now there have been three registries, the NOVA registry, the NCSI registry, and the PVAD Japanese registry, all getting 70% or more survival, significantly better than the previous 30 years of trials. So I think that we're here, we have, with 3 trials now, we should have a guideline-based 2A indication for use in Impella and cardiogenic shock. But in order to make this a widespread pattern, I think is going to be required a randomized trial. Greg Stone is here. He's the chairman of the steering committee for the RECOVER-4 study. We just had a meeting in Europe earlier this week, and a number of German sites are going to be starting. We believe that we're going to be recruiting the first patient either in New Mexico or in Europe within the next 3 months. And this is going to be a study that's going to randomize the NCSI-based strategy of Impella with hemodynamic monitoring, weaning of vasopressors versus control. And this is really going to be where we're going to really kind of rely on numbers of centers to really do this trial. There is, next year, I think Dr. Sharma is going to be talking about 2 really important studies that will be number 1 and number 2. The first one will be the ECLS study. It's a randomized trial that Holger Thiel is presenting at the ESC meetings, which is going to be a randomized of usual care versus ECMO. And that's going to be the first randomized ECMO trial that's being done. The group from the DANGER study now has 3 patients to go in their trial. That one is Impella versus control. They've been doing this study for 10 years, and they only have 3 patients more before they'll be done. So that's probably going to be presented at the late-breaking trials at the ACC. So there's going to be a lot of data coming together, but we really need sites. We'd love to have some high-volume sites in this area, but honestly, there isn't a single group in Manhattan right now that's even on the radar screen for being involved in RECOVER-4. So what I would say is that to the sites that have been bitching about lack of data, help us get the data together, enroll in these patients, recruit this trial. Thank you very much.